this is our first real lecture, right? The first day of class was basically going over housekeeping stuff. Went over some basics last time, but here we're actually in this big trajectory, and we're starting with our first actual literature. And notice how far down we are here. We're almost 5,000 years ago. In fact, this text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is really about that old, 5,000 years, but it precedes written language. It was written on basically clay tablets, and a number of versions of them, and they're all kind of mashed together. Let me just open this up so we can see where we're going. And the edition we have, which is in the reader, is actually a wonderful edition. And I say that because it was a poet who put it together as the translator, Stephen Mitchell. He actually doesn't speak the languages here, but he was able to put 7 different translations together and get something that worked. Why do I hear people talking? See, when I say that, I don't hear anyone. I can't. All right, so it's actually a wonderful translation, and it's the reason for getting the reader, if nothing else. Although it's not all in there, if you want to read the whole thing, you would have to buy the whole translation. So let me just show you why I'm saying it's so nice. Epic of Gilgamesh, number 1, right here. This is the opening lines, if you haven't read it already. He had seen everything, had experienced all emotions, from exaltation to despair, had been granted a vision into the great mystery, the secret places, the primeval days before the flood. He had journeyed to the edge of the world and made his way back, exhausted but whole. He had carved his trials on stone temples, had restored the holy Ayana temple and the massive wall of Uruk, which no city on earth can equal. See how the ramparts gleam like copper in the sun. Continuing here. Climb the stone staircase, more ancient than the mind can imagine. Approach the Ayana temple, sacred to Ishtar, temple that no king has equaled in size or beauty. Walk on the wall of Uruk, follow its course around the city, inspect its mighty foundations, examine its brickworks, how masterfully it is built. Observe the land it encloses, the palm trees, the gardens, the orchards, the glorious palaces and temples, the shops and marketplaces, the houses, the public squares. So this is the oldest major work in Western literature. This is the very beginning of Western literature. If you think something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, they're well over 1,000 years more recent than this. This is ancient, and it's quite wonderful, really. Although it says an awful lot about the culture that created it, and it says a lot about the culture that gave birth to Western thinking, and that's what we're going to look at. But I do encourage you just to read it like what it is. It's a really wonderful work of literature. So, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So the first thing we want to talk about is Uruk. Uruk, by the way, was discovered in the 19th century. It was lost for thousands of years. The notion that Gilgamesh had that he was going to make this eternal city, yeah, that didn't quite work out the way he wanted. Although this text did make him immortal, but we'll talk about that later. So Uruk, Gilgamesh's capital city. But first, let's take an iClicker poll. I'm going to hit poll here. Start it. The clock is ticking. You have 1 minute and 24 seconds, 90 seconds. And I'm just curious who did the readings, if you've and how you found it, if you thought it was boring. I got to tell you, if you're thinking, you're kind of vacillating, you're deciding whether to drop the course or not, this is as good as it gets. This is a very good text. When you get to Hesiod and all, you're going to wish you still had Gilgamesh. It's a wonderful text. But well, let's see. Can I actually show the results? Okay. Some people found it a little boring. More people liked it. So more people liked it than found it boring, and it's an even for people who liked it and have yet to read it. So it's fully fine that you haven't read it, and just a little boring. So C, the most boring thing I've ever read, only 25 people. That's only 5% of the class. So, and even those people are dropping now. So, okay. I was curious about that one. Okay. So Uruk, Gilgamesh's capital. So what I just read, the second part, when I went to that second slide, it gives you this imaginative walk around the city. That's like the very first thing. So we talk about the character of Gilgamesh, that's there, but one of the first things that we talk about is the city itself. Really important here. Uruk is surrounded by a wall. This is not only the greatest work of literature that begins in the West. Uruk is the greatest city the West had ever produced. It was a remarkable achievement culturally, technologically, and all. Even more remarkable, like many ancient cities, it's surrounded by a wall. That wall has two purposes. And you're familiar with this concept, maybe not with cities, but like every castle, right? In kids' storybooks, they're surrounded by a wall. That's what protects them. There's a drawbridge, right? That's how you get in. Believe it or not, cities were designed this way. In fact, if you go to modern day London and you can take a tour and you can walk around the city and see where the original walls were before like the 15th and 16th century when they started really getting built outside of. Why are those walls there? Well, just like a castle, they're there to protect the people inside, but from two things, and this is important for us. One, probably your go-to answer, protect you from other people, right? Marauding, brigands are kind of going to come and besiege the castle and try to get in. Yeah, but also the environment, especially in the sense of wild animals. Wild animals were a major issue for human beings for thousands of years. This resolves the problem. So you don't have to worry about wolves walking around the street, things like that, or coming into the city at night. You're literally walling them off. In the West, the environment has been seen as a danger throughout history. So here it is, the first great city, the first great work of literature, and right there, opening text, here's the wall and why the wall is so important. And let me tell you a little more about the city, and it kind of explains how significant this wall is. So here's the actual text. Observe the land it encloses, the wall encloses, the palm trees, the gardens, the orchards. The city here, even 5,000 years ago, is a highly modified built environment. This is not nature inside of those walls. Even agriculturally, these are gardens and orchards. Gardens and orchards don't occur in nature, right? You make a garden, you organize a garden, you plant an orchard. That's what's going on here. There's nothing inside of the walls here that is left, as far as we know, and certainly not from the description, that is left wild. That word will become important to us in a couple thousand years. Wild will become the word wilderness. There's no wildness, no wilderness here. There's all agricultural land inside of there, or where people live. So you have here, 5,000 years ago, the distinction between the country and the city. It's still a part of our cultural memory, as it very much shapes what we mean by nature. So I'll go over this in detail, but let me just hit you with it here. The idea is what's inside of that city is not natural. It's all created by human beings. The houses, the orchards, the gardens, that whole laundry list of things. But what's outside is totally nature. And you have now this binary structure, this dyad, these two things. Say country and city, but more importantly, from our big point of view, it's the natural and the artificial, that which is nature and that which is not nature. And already it's here. Our modern concept of natural, which I am sure you think about daily, and I'm saying it so confidently because you walk into any store buying any sort of product, certainly food, you look for natural products, you're buying clothing, you look for natural fabrics, you're buying some sort of, cosmetic, you look for natural projects. This distinction of why would you even say that? What makes it different from other things? Well, it's not artificial, it's not natural, if that makes sense. It's shaped, this has been an abiding principle for 5,000 years, and it's still alive and well. And I especially, walk into a store, walk into like a Whole Foods store, you will see hundreds of labels, they're advertising natural. as something that you would want. Yeah, it does not, this distinction exist among other cultures necessarily. Some other cultures, yeah. But if you're looking at like traditional indigenous cultures, you're not going to see this. You're not going to see that there would be a difference between human beings and what we do and the rest of the world. The notion there is often that it's all deeply enmeshed and interconnected. When we get to Buddhism, you're going to see a whole ideology built around that. But here in this culture, it exists. But in a lot of others, it didn't, because everything is seen as, how could you say that an animal is, natural and a human being is not? Aren't we kind of the same exact things? Other cultures talk about us being, relatives of animals and all. Why would you say that we're different? And in fact, even though you might say, well, I don't believe in beliefs like that, to think that, my cousin is the puma or something. You do believe it if you believe in modern science, in the sense that DNA is shared across every species on the planet, all life on the planet, and that includes, animals, plants, fungi, whatever, is all shared. We are all relatives. We share the same DNA. Even primitive things like yeast have half the DNA that we do. So, but that's not the way it was conceived of in the West as we start. The two were different, the natural and the artificial. The interesting thing is, and I just want to make it clear, when it emerges here, it's a binary structure, but the natural is not the good thing here. You go into Whole Foods, you buy a natural product, it costs you more because it's supposed to be a good thing. Here, what's natural is kind of scary, what's outside the city. We're going to see this with Enkidu in a minute. But what's inside the city, the unnatural, is what's celebrated in that thing that I read in the beginning. All those wonderful things about how people have changed it and modified it and made it different, that's celebrated. You don't want that when you buy a product. You don't want to read that it's been changed, it's been modified, it's been made different. You want it to be simple as can be, maybe just 5 ingredients that are all natural. That's the idea. It is going to be more recent than you think. So you might think that it's only since the Second World War that we got this preoccupation with natural. No, it's I'll give you a hint, it's at least a couple thousand years old, but we'll see that point where it changes. So walk into any market, such as Whole Foods today. You'll see hundreds and hundreds of products being sold with the label natural. You can probably think of a lot more yourself. This binary structure, again, all these years, thousands of years old, it's still alive and well today. It is a cornerstone of Western thinking, and we're going to see it again and again and again throughout the term. And what's provocative here is it comes from the very beginning. It's not like Plato will come up with this over 2,000 years later. No, it comes from the very beginning, this distinction, although it does get switched. Oops. Just to repeat what I said here, what happens is the work of human artifice, the artificial, is what's privileged. So the natural is not good at all. And we're going to see this when we see Enkidu, and Enkidu is a character we'll meet in a minute if you haven't read it. If you're one of those 214 people that hasn't read it yet, we'll see. Yeah. Oh, and this is then, notice how I'm repeating from the very beginning, the celebration of it. This is boasting, right? Boasting of the palm trees, the gardens, the orchards, the palaces, the temples, the shops, the marketplace, the houses, the public squares. Nothing here is natural. It's not. Notice that really big tree that had been here for hundreds of years before the city, or notice the stream that still runs through the city that we haven't touched. Nothing like this. This is all a celebration of human achievement. So the character of Gilgamesh, the title character. Yeah, trigger warning, I have it in the syllabus. There is a reference to rape in the text, which I'll be unpacking a little in this section. So if you want to not be here for that, I perfectly understand. So Gilgamesh is actually was an actual person. He was a Sumerian king. He lived 4,600 years ago, maybe longer. And again, most of the great epics that we have in the West, or a number of them, like the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then thousands of years later, Beowulf, these all predated written language. So that's how old we are. These were all originally sung. And you can actually see traces of it. Scholars look for that, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you can see things that are sung over and over again, like Enkidu drapes himself like a net across the door. That would have been like a device to help you remember it, the bard, the person that was singing it. But it's very, very old. Yeah, so this is Gilgamesh from a stone inscription. We know very little about him, and this is a good pitch for, I would argue, coming from my perspective, for literature, right? Because if we didn't have this text, what would we know about Gilgamesh? We could infer things from that work. We could see where the city had been. We could put some things together. But what did these people think? What did they believe? That's where literature and a written record comes in really handy. For example, what we just talked about, how would you have known that they thought of the country and the city in quite that way? Well, you could have inferred it by the fact that they built a wall, but the celebration of that we just read, the foregrounding it at the beginning of their text, it's just something you're not going to get from the physical record that you get from, physical anthropology or archaeology, although they can tell us a lot, obviously. So, yeah, here's the question for the people who have read it. How would you describe this guy? Is he a good king? And here's where it gets troubling. What was his attitude toward the people that he ruled over? So such a focus on that, and especially women. So this is a quote from the text. "The city is his possession. He struts through it, arrogant, his head raised high, trampling its citizens like a wild bull. He is king. He does what he wants, takes the son from his father and crushes him, takes the girl from her mother and uses her, the warrior's daughter, the young man's bride. He uses her. No one dares to oppose him." So what's this about? Probably evident to you. Uses her is a reference to rape, the so-called right of the Lord, which existed in some cultures. And this is the notion that when a couple were to be married, that the king had the right to sleep with the wife before the husband on the wedding night. And that is something that Gilgamesh apparently does. And of course, the text here is very clear that the city is not happy with that. Why would people be happy with that? And yet, this is a very patriarchal, culture, and we're looking at horrific institutionalized misogyny taking place. But I would just clarify that this will change by the end of the text, but nonetheless, this is the situation, which makes it all the more remarkable because Gilgamesh is going to become the sort of prototypical hero in the West. He will become the character that others sort of look to and emulate. But one of the things that will be emulated, and it's going to be kind of a motif in these sort of texts, is that there's going to be a transformation of the character, and Gilgamesh is going to be transformed and made into a better person. And in fact, on this particular issue, but it is very difficult to be sympathetic with Gilgamesh at this point in the text. It's ironic that he abuses power and is a rapist when he's actually called the protector of people. So what is the name of this king? What's like the title? He's the king of the land. He's the protector of the people. He's just in no stretch of the imagination, because remember, in addition to the violence against women here, he's also violent against young men who he conscripts to fight his wars and all. And this is obviously drawing attention to, this is a moment in time where rulers and sovereigns had pretty much absolute power. So, there have been all sorts of, sovereigns and royalties over the years, centuries, but their powers have been reeled in. So the Magna Carta, the English Declaration of Right, 800 years ago, reeled in the powers of the King of England. That hasn't happened here in Gilgamesh's time. So it's going to be up to Gilgamesh to become reformed. But we don't read the end of the epic, but just to make you aware of it, Gilgamesh will become reformed by the end, although certainly not there yet. So he's especially interesting when we compare Gilgamesh to his double, and that's Enkidu. We'll talk about what doubling is here in a minute, and Enkidu is a wonderful opportunity to do that. Sorry. So our next character is Enkidu. Enkidu is usually referred to as the wild man of the text, and right off the bat, that should pique your interest from our perspective, because we were just talking a few minutes ago, I was about wild being related to wilderness. So he's this sort of incarnation of the wild, the wilderness, this thing that's been shut outside of the city. So who is Enkidu? Enkidu is a wild man. Why is he wild? He's outside of the city. He's not a civilized person. He's someone who eschews civilization and doesn't want to have anything to do with people. But what is so interesting about him is he's kind of this perfect double for Gilgamesh. Why? Well, both they're heroes, and in heroes at this time, they're portrayed as being huge. I mean, like bigger than any man, so formidable that no one could fight them and win. That's the problem with Gilgamesh. He can do what he's doing unchallenged because there's no one who could challenge Gilgamesh. He's just that formidable. But Enkidu, as his double, is that formidable, and that's what will make interesting their encounter here. But Enkidu is also a protector, and that's what makes him so different than Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is very clearly not protecting. The city and most of the people in it, and certainly all the female people in it, need protection from Gilgamesh. But Enkidu is a protector. So what does he protect? So in the beginning, he's living outside of the city. He's this wild man. The people working out there in their farms and all, they have a problem with animals, right? Animals are coming into their fields, stealing their animals and all. So what are they doing? They're setting up traps for the animals, snares for the animals. And then here's the problem. Here's Enkidu. Enkidu is self-proclaimed protector of wilderness, protector of wild. And he tears out the traps. He finds the traps, he rips them up. He finds animals caught in the traps, he lets the animals go. He is, again, not acting for his own interest at all, completely unlike Gilgamesh. He's acting for the interest of another. And interestingly, the other is animal here. So the whole issue of Gilgamesh that we talked about in the last section that was so disturbing, when Gilgamesh then on the marriage night goes to the marriage house, Enkidu was there. He stood like a boulder blocking the door. So this is the second instance. Once he becomes human, that's what he's protecting. Enkidu, and I don't want to be a spoiler if you haven't read it, but I can't help it. Enkidu and Gilgamesh have an epic battle. And who could fight Enkidu? Who could fight Gilgamesh? There's no one powerful enough but Enkidu. And they kind of, fight it out. And in the sort of language of this narrative, they become friends as a consequence. But from our point of view right now, this protector notion is going to be huge. He's, the great protector. And by the way, that motif you're familiar with today. Wonder where that started. Well, that's been around a long time that you need this male protector. Anyhow, been around for thousands of years. So once he becomes friends with Gilgamesh and they go on this epic trip to the cedar forest, he then becomes the protector of Gilgamesh. The elders turned to Enkidu and said, "We leave the king in your care, protect him." He repeatedly sprawled like a net across the doorway to protect Gilgamesh. And this epic battle that he has with Humbaba, we'll talk about in a minute, Enkidu protects Gilgamesh. So Enkidu is a pretty selfless individual here, but he has different causes along the way, for sure, but always a protector. And immediately after being fed by the shepherds, what does he do? And this is a turning point. He went with sword and spear. He chased off lions and wolves all night. He guarded the flocks. He stayed awake and guarded them while the shepherds slept. So when he becomes human, when that transition happens, which itself is interesting, but we just don't have time to talk much about it. But once that happens, he immediately kind of changes sides. The animals he protected before, now he protects human beings from the animals rather than protecting the animals from human beings. So we sort of, you never quite know what, if you don't know where you're picking up the narrative, you really don't know what Enkidu is protecting, but you can be sure of one thing, Enkidu is protecting something. That's just his character. And this protector is going to be important. Note that in those first two instances, he's either protecting animals from people or people from animals. Those are the first two instances of protecting before he gets in the city and is protecting the bride and all that. And what he's doing there is policing the boundary between natural and unnatural. He inverts the role when he switches from wild to human and protects animals rather than the other way around. But he's right there, sort of protecting those two. And we'll see why that's important when we get to these protectors of place. So regardless of whether the artificial is privileged over the natural or the natural preferred over the artificial, we still imagine human beings in the worlds that we create as somehow diametrically opposed to nature, which is defined as precisely what is untouched by human hands. So Enkidu is just so interesting as he crosses the boundary, and second, then polices it. Let's see if I can get this out of the way, to protect human beings from nature. That's basically what I said before, but I'll just repeat it there. And Gilgamesh, so we're talking about doubling. Gilgamesh and Enkidu are doubles, but there's another double here. Consider Enkidu is first, and when you consider that Enkidu is first and foremost a perfecter. In other words, will there be yet another figure as formidable as Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but like Enkidu being a protector, which, by the way, is the central thing again that Gilgamesh should be, right? He's supposed to be the protector of the people. So this is it's sort of like jumping out at you. It's a big theme in this text, protector. And that is the character Humbaba. So let's take another iClicker poll. 90 seconds. I'm just kind of curious. Let's see if I can get this out of the way. You know, when you go to the market, do you gravitate towards things that are natural? And if so, what do you mean by that? So yes, but it has to be substantiated. In other words, say something like organic. Two, yes, you definitely gravitate toward things that are natural. Somewhat, well, you see the ones here. So let's see what you said rather than I say. Most people, it's an interesting curve, right? It's kind of a nice shaped curve there. Most people gravitate products that are somewhat gravitate towards products that are more natural. And the people who definitely do, that would be A and B. The people who look for it to be substantiated are in more of them. And the people who say it doesn't make a difference are in the minority. By the way, just so you're clear on that, the word natural, if you see it in a store, it says natural product, or it says natural something or nature something and all, that means absolutely nothing. Anyone can put that kind of label on anything at all. Organic in the US is something that is carefully looked after. You have to actually apply to get an organic label for food or clothing or anything. So if you do go to buy something natural and you really, you know, it's what you really want, go for something like organic or some assurance that it is, because otherwise it doesn't really mean much at all, if anything. Okay, let's go back to our lecture. Character Humbaba. Who is Humbaba? Humbaba is the protector of the cedar forest. He's placed there to protect the forest, which is home to the temple of the goddess Ishtar. So this matters. If you haven't read it yet, again, I hate to be a spoiler, but Gilgamesh and Enkidu are going on this great expedition to go to the cedar forest. And there's a problem. And what they want to do there, just to be very clear, Gilgamesh is, if you read through the text, in addition to him being such a problem of not being a protector, he's got other problems. And one of them is he wants everything to be sort of a triumph of Gilgamesh. He wants to rebuild the city of Uruk, to make it more bigger and beautifuler than it ever has been before, for one reason, and that is so everyone will think that Gilgamesh is the greatest king that has ever lived. He has a real ego problem. And as a consequence, he needs natural resources to do this. And the problem is, well, it's not a problem. The good news is, right up the Euphrates River from him, not too far up, there's a massive cedar forest. And 5,000 years ago, that was a great natural resource to have. This is an old growth cedar forest, huge amount of wood that you can use both as a fuel. And remember, before fossil fuels, wood is the primary energy source on the planet. And also, you know, these buildings are all built out of wood, temples are built out of wood. So much of this is built out of wood. The problem, and this is where Humbaba comes in, is that this forest is sacred. It's sacred to a goddess, Ishtar. You may have heard of her. She's a big deal. And Ishtar has placed a demigod there, Humbaba. We'll talk about what he actually is. He's actually called a genus Loki. And his job is to protect the forest. So right off the bat, here we have another figure, every bit as strong as Gilgamesh, every bit as strong as Enkidu, and protector. He's all protector all the time. That's his whole purpose in life, is to be a protector. So this is an important point, and we're going to see this again and again. Many ancient religions, certain features of the environment, like rivers, mountains, forests, had a protector of place. That's called a genus Loki. That phrase, genus Loki, means in Latin, protector of place. Loki might look kind of familiar to you. Our word locale came out of that, or a place. Genus is more confusing, but in this context, it means protector. A genus Loki is a protector of place. There are so many religions, unconnected religions across the planet, across time, and yet so many of them had genus Loki figures. Humbaba is a genus Loki figure. So let me continue on, and I'll explain a little more about what they are. The interesting thing is, these protectors, who are they? What are they protecting against? So Enkidu, it's very clear each time who he's protecting against, right? He's protecting against farmers who would hurt animals, protecting against animals who would hurt farmers, protecting against Gilgamesh who would harm a bride, all that. What is being protected here? Across all those religions, it's almost always the same. They're not protecting the forest against animals or storms or gods. They always are there to protect the place against human beings. And again, you have this binary structure again between nature and human beings. And there's not a wall around the cedar forest per se, but there's this assumed barrier that's being protected by a genus Loki. You cannot go in there and take what you want. The genus Loki is the protector of the place. The religions that have this will be important when we look at metaphysical religions like the Judeo-Christian religion. These are almost all religions that call for the worship of the earth itself. rather than the worship of a metaphysical God. In other words, in these religions, there are all sorts of things across the planet that you can worship, whether it's a forest or an imagined goddess who's in charge of that forest, like Ishtar, or a stream or a mountain or whatever, but everything is here on the earth. Other religions, where you have a God outside of the earth, who's outside of the creation, maybe, like the God we're going to meet in the Hebrew Testament of the Bible, they don't have these sort of things. These are more of a conspicuous feature of religions to call for the worship of the earth. So let's talk about them in a little more detail so you understand their significance. So from an environmental perspective, why are these kinds of deities particularly important? Because it reflects a belief in deities that very much belong to and are part of the earth. These cannot be separated from the earth. You will not find a genus Loki wandering around somewhere. The genus Loki is moored to a particular place. You might wonder why you had these to begin with, by the way. And if you think about it, it'll make sense why they occurred all over the planet, different peoples at different times, and different belief systems. So say you live next to a stream. Well, and many people did, 70% of people on the planet still live close to waterways. Say you live close to a stream. Well, everything about your life may have depended on that stream. Why? Well, first, if you live there because you use it for water, you use it for transportation, that's probably why you moved there. You may use it to, to fish there and all. There's a reason that you were there, moved there. There's a reason that that stream is important to you or a river is important to you. So there's that. But then what happens if something goes wrong? What do I mean by that? Well, if there's a drought, the stream could entirely go away and everything that you've built could be jeopardized because there's no water and maybe no fish. Or the flip side, not in terms of complete absence, but what if there's some horrible storm and suddenly that nice little stream floods and maybe floods half your village away? That's bad too. So as a human being, you kind of have to accept the fact that, yeah, you're not very powerful in the earth. And that stream or that river is a lot more powerful than you are. Your whole life depends on that river or stream. Oh, people are saying they can't see this, so I'm moving it up a little. I'll move it down if there's a problem. So you're not very powerful. The stream or river is very powerful. Your life depends on it. A perfectly natural belief system to create would be one that says, we should try to make nice with this river. Maybe we should, do things to try to appease the river. We should make offerings to the river. We should act respectfully to the river. And it's not a far jump at all to say we should imagine that there is a personality there controlling it, that the river has a name and that name is an actual deity. That would make a lot of sense, and you could see why it's sort of a logical leap for people to have done that. So that's why genus Loki figures appear so often, and you can see why it makes perfect sense. And also in terms of like the cedar forest, why this one makes sense is, and this was very common all over. Say you had something like a cedar forest. Well, how do you make sure you always have a supply of wood from the cedar forest? You sure as heck don't do it by, clear cutting the whole forest. If you have a very sensible belief system put in place, what you would do is say something like this: the cedar forest is protected by a genus Loki, protector of place. That protector of place will not allow you to desecrate that site. That's a holy site. That's what the forest is. But if you make nice, if you make offerings to the forest, and if you say that you're not going to be disrespectful and you're just going to take what you need, maybe take 5% of the trees a year, maybe just a few dozen trees per year, then that wouldn't be sacrilege, that wouldn't be disrespectful, that would be in a way that honored the forest and the place. from like a modern environmental point of view, you got to love this, right? Because you might as well have environmentalist position there as opposed to Genus Loci saying, you need to act respectfully here. You can take some, but you cannot destroy this ecosystem. You have to let the ecosystem stay in place, but you can still benefit by it. That's why this is so important environmentally. Sorry, I kind of digressed there, but I wanted to give you a good perspective on it. And we'll deal with this in a little more detail as we're coming up. Okay. Yep. So in religions of this type, these features, whether it's forest, rivers, mountains, whatever, are sacred. They're flat out called sacred. So the cedar forest is sacred. And as a consequence, what I just said, it's wonderfully protected from violation and exploitation by human beings. The problem is, what if human needs or ambitions become so great that you're frustrated by that, right? So you want more than it can give. That's where Gilgamesh is. And he has a problem because there's a religious prohibition that is stopping him. No individual is doing it, but this is tougher. I mean, this is the belief system of the culture is in place, and he's knocking up against it. Yeah, typically you can just use the resources in a limited extent. There's no Genus Loci is ever going to let you violate a place by taking too much or destroying it. And even doing things like changing the course of a river, that has to be carefully negotiated with the god. But for the most part, you just have to leave it be what it is. And so what is Humbaba there for? So, and it's interesting because if you read this text, and it's one of the reasons I suggested you could either read the text before or after, because if you read the text and you buy into the language of the text, Humbaba is flat out described as a monster. And Gilgamesh is saying, I'm going to go to the cedar forest and I'm going to kill that monster. But that's not what Humbaba is in this belief system. Humbaba is this protector. He's a demigod, and he's put there by a major god, Ishtar, to make sure that the cedar forest is not destroyed. So Gilgamesh has a real challenge because, again, he doesn't have to, I mean, there is no Humbaba there. I mean, okay, this is just a belief system. There was no beast there that he had to kill, no monster. But what he had to destroy, which in some ways is more formidable, is a religion that his people believed in. To do that, and I don't want to be a spoiler, but he's going to need a new religion, but we'll get to that. By the way, just as a little trivia here, this was a real cedar forest. We know from the archaeological evidence that it was there. It is independently referenced in other texts like the Hebrew Bible, and it was actually an intact old growth, like Lebanese cedar. So I should have put a picture in one of these, but I tried to not put many pictures here so that if people can't see the screen, you know, if low vision or if you're blind, it wouldn't matter. But if you do put in your browser Lebanese cedar, you'll see these trees. They're just absolutely massive. And it's a real place which corroborates what happened here, which is that this culture did go take down that forest. So the cedar forest, let's talk about it. Let's see if I can keep that thing out of our way. They cast huge weapons that ordinary men could never carry, axes that weighed 200 pounds each, knives with cross guards. So interesting thing right off the bat here, note that the principal weapon that Gilgamesh and Enkidu are carrying into battle are not swords or spears or shields, but axes. Now, I know that there are battle axes and people fought with them, but it is conspicuous that that's the main thing that's mentioned here. So you get to the Iliad and Odyssey, you'll have pages about a particular sword, a particular shield and things, but here it's axes. And I should also let you know where technology comes in, why this is happening now. In other words, people may have eyed that cedar forest for hundreds or thousands of years. We are now transitioning into the Copper and Bronze Age. It's difficult to know exactly what was going on here, but we now have metal tools, which we didn't have before. Why that matters, if you did look up the Lebanese cedar and see these trees are far wider than I can reach. Yeah, quite a job to cut with an axe at all, but with the stone axe, yeah, not so much. Metal axe, things change a lot. So we're seeing a technological change here. We're seeing an ambitious culture, certainly an ambitious person is described here, but we still have this pesky religion. So again, if you buy into the language of the text, if you read the narrative at face value, what I'll later call the cover story, it's going to be described as a battle. But literally and historically, we know that what actually happened is this is an expedition to cut down a forest, hence the need for axes. It's described like it's this epic battle between two guys and this monster, but in fact, this would have been probably thousands of individuals going there to cut the forest down. The story is different than the fact. If you look carefully in the story, you'll see things like the axes and all here, but it's not the language of the narrative itself. And what is it? The story of how a Genus Loci protecting a place was defeated so that a great forest could be cut and exploited. So this part of this text, and the only part that we read, is really about deforestation. It's about a culture cutting down a forest. If it would be in the 20th or 21st century, would we read about, fights going back and forth and laws and rights being, contested and all. But here, in the language of this text, this is about a religion protecting a place and that being defeated. And make no mistake, we'll get to it in a minute, Gilgamesh is not defeating Humbaba. There is no Humbaba. Gilgamesh is defeating a religion here. So they took their axes and penetrated deeper into the forest. They went chopping down cedars. The wood chips flew. Gilgamesh chopped down the mighty trees. Enkidu hewed the trunks into timbers. Enkidu said, "We have chopped down the trees of the cedar forest. We have brought to earth the highest of the trees." So yeah, this does not read like the Iliad, the Odyssey, Beowulf's fight with Grendel's mother or Grendel or the dragon. This is people cutting down a forest. And if you take that they and you think not that it's two people, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but as a whole expedition of people, those thousands of individuals took their axes and penetrated deeper into the forest. They went chopping down cedars, the wood chips flew. And instead of saying Gilgamesh, say part of that group of people chopped down the mighty trees. Part of that group hewed the trees into timbers. And let me flesh that out in the next slide. I think it's the next one. Yeah. Obviously not a description of an epic battle. It's a logging operation. And how it worked here is, and in the text, it's if you realize it's about deforestation, it makes certain sense. So the cedar forest is upriver from the Euphrates. Euphrates is a huge river in that region. No doubt you've heard of it. So how is this operation working? Gilgamesh is cutting the trees down. Massive trees are being dropped. So Gilgamesh and battalions of other people are cutting down the trees. Now the trees are dropped on the ground. Enkidu processed them on site by hewing them into square timbers. And let me just go back and show you that part where it says it. Enkidu hewed the trunks into timbers. So what that is, you've probably seen pictures of like timber frame buildings, maybe barns where it's massive timbers, they're all square, and that's how the building is constructed. That's what they did here too. But logs, of course, are not square, they're round, and part of this group of individuals trimmed all the bark off and all the excess part and processed it right there on site so they could leave all the dross, all the stuff they didn't need. They got nice, usable timbers. They dropped them into the Euphrates, and another group of people were waiting down at Uruk, and they just pulled those finished timbers right out of the river and used them for construction. And that is standard logging practice. So that's what this story is about. The remarkable thing about this, by the way, people have been reading this for a long, long time. And up until the last few decades, no one read that this way. Everyone thought that this was like a proto-Iliad or Odyssey. It's this epic battle. But if you look here, it's just so obvious. It's about a logging operation. The heroes then are not just two men, but thousands of men or individuals who took place in the deforestation operation. And by the way, there are modern parallels. You've probably been thinking of them already. Donald Trump's administration planned to open up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska to oil and gas development, or the Biden initially, their administration's Willow Project, which was retracted. What I mean by that is there are plenty of leaders, and you could go through history from Gilgamesh's time through Donald Trump and Joe Biden, our last two leaders, who had the same idea in general sense. What is that? There were great natural resources waiting. Someone had to take the initiative and go get those resources. They are protected in Alaska. They're protected by environmentalists, by environmental law, but somebody had to say, no, I am not going to stand for that. No protector of place is going to stop me. I am going to get that, and we're all going to experience a more prosperous life. And in general, we'll see this again and again. It's going to set up the dynamic for this question that you've heard again and again environmentally, and that is, how do you weigh out human needs and other needs of the planet, needs of the forest, needs of other animals? So classic example, should you destroy a whole forest if one owl is going to go extinct? If that's the home of one owl, isn't it worth it for human beings? I mean, we're so valuable and important. We should be able to do that, and why should we care about one owl? If you're doing the math, human interest should always win out over other interests. Gilgamesh certainly believes that in this case, and certainly our last two leaders, at least initially, were kind of thinking the same way. So in some sense, it is just that. It's a cover story for deforestation. It's an epic battle. It reads like one, sure, but read it carefully and then either reread it, or if you haven't read it, read it with these eyes, and you'll see it as it's just not a typical battle. Gilgamesh yelled, he lifted his massive axe, he swung it, tore into Humbaba's neck, and the axe third stroke, he toppled like a cedar and crashed to the ground. So that's the text. Humbaba is also a double. He's repeatedly associated for the cedar forest. So he is like a tree. So the story, the cover story, the battle, the fight against the monster, he gets cut down by Gilgamesh. How? Not with a knife, not with a sword, not with a spear, but with an axe. And he's cut down just like a tree because symbolically, I mean, he is a tree. He's symbolically standing for a tree. And his defeat makes the cutting down of the forest possible. So it's, if you think about it in terms of that religious prohibition, everyone has been said, don't go there. You have to make nice to the god. You can't, Ishtar is going to be angry. And Gilgamesh goes there and confronts the genus Loki. Instead of negotiating, instead of making nice, instead of bringing offerings, he kills him. And that's pretty remarkable because, and again, what we're seeing here in the literal sense is the deforestation. The cover story is that it's an epic battle, but the real battle here is between Gilgamesh and the religion, the religious prohibition. I mean, who's this guy? He's got to be the most arrogant human being alive at the time, as far as these people were concerned, to think that he could do that. And we'll see why he thinks he can directly. But just to be clear, it was an old growth forest. We know that from the historical record. Enkidu even makes it clear here, if you read the text carefully. We have chopped down the trees of the cedar forest. We have brought to earth the highest of the trees, the cedar whose top once pierced the sky. So I don't know if you know this, but trees that are allowed to grow in forests, depending on the forest, depending on the trees, can live a long time, many hundreds, thousands of years. So when you go to something like a rainforest in the Amazonian basin or in Indonesia, these trees in many cases have been there 4, 5, 6, 800 years, and they've matured and are very tall. When people decide to cut them down and to replant or whatever, commercially trees grow plenty tall within 100 years or less. So trees are never allowed to get to be as tall as the sky here. They get tall enough to be commercially productive and they get cut down. But this was such a prized forest because no one had ever done it before, other than maybe a tree here and there. This is entirely an untouched forest. Genus Loci figures in Gilgamesh. So here's what I've been saying, and I made it explicit here. What Gilgamesh does is, this is the city of Uruk, symbolically. It's nothing short of sacrilege. This is a religious act here. They defaced a sacred site, an ancient forest protected by a genus Loci. It would be like during a time when Christianity was sort of unchallenged in Europe. So what I mean by that medieval period, Renaissance period, it would be like a group of people going into a major, cathedral and chopping it apart. I mean, imagine the sort of shock waves that would send through a culture that someone believed that they could actually do that, and by the way, wouldn't be really frightened because, this is a religious site protected by a god. Do you really want to do something like that? And this should be raising a question. What in the world, in your mind, what made Gilgamesh think he could do that? And we'll get that directly. So Gilgamesh, now reformed rapist, his forced entry into the cedar forest clearly echoes rape, by the way. And I didn't want to not mention this. A number of ecofeminists have worked on this for a number of years, and we give you an example of it. Even the language of the epic suggests forcible penetration. Gripping their axes, their knives unsheathed, they entered the forest. They took their axes and penetrated deeper into the forest. So this language, this behavior on Gilgamesh's part, it just still seems to be permeating through this text. It's a deeply disturbing in that sense. And even though it may seem that Gilgamesh is reformed here, Gilgamesh is still acting in a way that is deeply problematic. So earth deities, more generally. So our friends, the ecofeminists, which I count myself, have long argued, and with different degrees of success, that there was a shift in the West, in these cultures, from female deities to male deities. And this happened sometime before the Epic of Gilgamesh. So if you look at ancient stone carvings, and these can go back very, very long. So this is like 5,000 years ago. These carvings have been found that are like 20,000 years, considerably older, but they often show a trinity, three gods connected. So you may know in Christianity, there's that Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, but this was a Trinity, and it was called the maid, the matron, the crone, and it's still alive and well in Greek culture with something like the myth of Demeter, where you have three characters on display: Persephone, who's also known as Kore, Demeter, and Hecate. And what this is about is a deity that symbolizes the three stages of a woman's life. So prepubescent, which is Persephone. In fact, in Greek, the word Kore means girl. Demeter is considered the matron. This is the stage of a woman's life where she can bear children. And then Hecate is postmenopausal. But the three of them together are seen as sort of the the god of this culture. And make no mistake, it is female, and it is focused, as that particular kind of trinity suggests, it is focused on the ability to create, what we call today reproduction, but here would have seemed more powerful than that. In other words, men cannot bring life into being. We talk about like God's doing that. So we get to the Hebrew Testament, we're going to see that's kind of like the claim to fame of the God there, that he creates everything. But people looked at the possibility of creation and they saw it always went back to women. So it's not surprising, and ecofeminists have argued, that the first deities, God figures, were female, which requires that a transition happened to get to where we are today. Because when we get to the Hebrew Testament, make no mistake, it's all male God. But the argument is, before that, there was a belief system that centered not on male deity, but female deities. So here's a big shift that happens in this text. Shift from a matriarchal deity. So remember, Cedar Forest is home to Ishtar, female goddess, to a male one. And that's Gilgamesh's champion that we haven't talked about. His name is Shamash. He is the sun god, he is a male god, and he is not a god of the earth. So in terms of like, is he a genus Loki, protector of place? No, he's bigger than that. And he doesn't even inhabit any place on earth. I mean, where's the sun? The sun is separate and apart from the earth. And it's a different kind of god. It is not an earth god. And Gilgamesh is arguing that he has the protection of this new god, and basically that there's a new religion on the scene here. And Gilgamesh has this protection, and this god is more powerful than any earth god. This god is, more powerful than the earth. And Gilgamesh says, by virtue of my God and the protection that my God gives, I can do whatever I want here because I am authorized by my God. And these older gods, I'm not going to pay attention to. I am not going to, stand by and let them keep me from the cedar forest. And it's interesting because in many earlier religions, it's a female deity. And in this text, that would be Aruru, if you remember, who's given the power of creating life. So if you remember in the text, or if you haven't read it, where does Enkidu come from? Enkidu is created by a goddess who fashions him out of clay. Why does that make sense? Well, if female deities have the power of creation, who's going to create life? It's going to always be a female, and it's Aruru. The shift will happen here, and by the time we get to Genesis, where it's a male deity, and remember, Genesis is coming out of the same part of the world, so the story is basically the same, except that deity, that human being that gets fashioned out of clay, is not Enkidu, it's Adam. And Adam is not fashioned by a goddess, Aruru. Adam is fashioned by a male god. So somehow along the line, 1,000+ years after this, the story is kind of the same, but with one major difference. It is no longer a male god who has the power of creation. It is no longer a female god who has the power of creation. That power has been usurped by a male god. So let's keep going. Even without this ecofeminist perspective, which I think is important and compelling, the Epic of Gilgamesh records a decisive moment in human history when earth deities were, in the metaphorical imagery of the epic, defeated by human beings with the aid of a metaphysical deity. So that's the big story here. It's not even deforestation, as important as that is. It's certainly not the cover story of defeating this monster. It's the notion that originally, in this part of the world, there were earth-based religions that protected the place. And in a very specific case, they protected the cedar forest. But a shift is happening here, whereas that old religion is being cast aside, and with it, all its prohibitions, all its protections. And instead, you're going to have metaphysical deity. and people who believe in that metaphysical deity. I don't want to be a big spoiler, but we're going to see people who apply this understanding to other metaphysical religions. Let's leave it that way. You think about it. So what happens when human ambition, and Gilgamesh is described as having nothing but ambition. He's a profoundly arrogant, ambitious individual. When it becomes strong enough, but think of it not only in terms of Gilgamesh being described that way, but this city has an ambition. It wants to be, it's already the greatest city on the planet, and it wants to just, become even greater. It's deeply steeped in ambition. When it becomes strong enough, earth deities such as Janus, Loki, Charis, protecting the environment, were cast out. In their place came metaphysical gods like Shamash, Gilgamesh's champion. So it's odd to think about, because you might think, well, this is really just about deforestation and all, and it is, but there was this big problem. The earth was being protected. I mean, it's not like these religions were set out to be, picture perfect, environmental religions, but nonetheless, in protecting the earth and seeing the earth as sacred and features of the earth as sacred, they did just that. They did protect the earth, but that would change when you'd have a different type of religion come on the scene that saw those places as no longer sacred. Because how would you destroy a sacred site? Again, it's like ripping apart a cathedral. In that sense, I think you can argue the Epic of Gilgamesh is truly an environmental epic, but it records how a desire to use the resources of the environment overcame an earlier religion based on the earth. And it's pretty striking in that sense, I would say. In short, this is the moment when human beings proclaimed that they were stronger than the environment and the deities protecting it. So again, remember that thing, you live near a stream, you're worried about it flooding, you're worried about drought, you're worried about this and that, you try to be, respectful to the stream and all. Human beings said, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to take what we want, and, maybe we can do better than nature can do. Maybe we can put canals in. Maybe we can modify that. Maybe we can put dams in. We can do all sorts of things. But one thing is for sure, we are stronger than this planet, or these features of the planet, for sure. So, wrapping up with our epilogue. Deforestation followed Western civilization out of Mesopotamia. It swept across North Africa, it swept into Europe, then into North and South America, and all over the world. In fact, the history of Western civilization is on a certain register, the history of deforestation. That's what characterized us. And it also made very clear we were never a sustainable civilization. What I mean by that, we always had to keep getting more resources. We couldn't stay at one place and live there in a sustainable way. We needed more. So, the big advantage of when Europeans moved to the so-called New World were all those resources there. And the primary resource that they went for, you hear all about gold and the Spanish interest in gold. In England and all, it was all about the wood. It's about the lumber, and why not? You could build, and they did build, and the Spanish did too, the most massive military powers the planet had ever seen, using those timbers to create ships. So John Perlin's Forest Journey is the other text that we have relating to this in the reader. It's a great book. John Perlin is actually a lecturer here in environmental studies. If you like what you read there, and you do need to read it, the book will actually give you a longer account of Western civilization. So people are like moving around, just relax. It was often the case that this deforestation was made by eradicating people there to begin with. And we're going to get to how it dealt with their religions as well. But these were often earth-based people who had earth-based religions in protecting things like forests. So deforestation, I mean, you've heard a lot about what went with colonization as the West colonized places. Lots of things did, but deforestation went with it as well. It was part and parcel of the whole project. Just a few more to go. many of these indigenous cultures live for thousands of years in the places they inhabited. And what I mean by that, they live sustainably. Gilgamesh was not able to live sustainably in Uruk. They needed more resources. They had to spread out. That would be the mantra of what would happen with colonization. So yeah, wonder how people can live sustainably. People always have lived sustainably, except certain cultures who were into this deforestation. You know what? Instead of rushing through this, we will just do this next time because hold on. Let me take the final iClicker poll and then I'll pick up where we left off. Yeah, does deforestation keep you up at night?